To start off, I just want to introduce myself. My name is Faye Mortensen. I'm actually relatively new to the Washington State Historical Society. I just joined the staff about 2 months ago. I come from the nonprofit world. I was working with the Washington Trust for Historic Preservation, and which is how I know quite a few of you in this grant group. So I'm really excited to continue working with you all. And to that end, I am familiar with heritage capital projects generally, but there's still quite a bit that I'm learning. So if there's a question that you have that we can't answer today, don't worry, we will find the answer and get it to you. So we'll do our best to answer every question that we can, and those that we can't, we will get the answers to you. So on the slide is my contact information and David Shinjek's contact information. David will be presenting a little bit later this morning about the reimbursement and reports piece. He is, the way we kind of divvy up the responsibilities within the grant program is that I kind of manage a lot of the sort of public-facing outreach and recruitment and instruction for the grant. And David really is more into the details of the paperwork and the reporting and processing of reimbursements. So he's the one who's going to review the documentation that you submit and then help process your reimbursement, your grant reimbursements. So we generally copy each other on most communications with all grantees, which is a good practice for you too, because we both want to stay up to date on what's going on with all the projects. And we'll both potentially be doing site visits, hopefully soon, when we're able to travel again. And then also on this slide is a couple of links. We have this, hopefully you can see my cursor, the grant information page on our website. It doesn't have a lot on it right now, but as we can continue into the contracting phase, we'll have this video linked there. We'll have some other instructions linked there, documents for you to download and use linked there. So this is a good page to keep handy for the future. And then the Heritage Portal. This is going to be very central to the grant process this year. You all submitted your applications through the portal. And this round, we also want to do all of the reporting and all of the processes moving forward within the portal as much as possible. So it's important to keep your contact information up to date, especially the primary contact. And that'll kind of be your main source of corresponding with us in sort of an official capacity with reports and things. So this is a bit of a learning curve for us. We're still implementing all the functions on the back end of the portal, and we're still fixing some technical glitches. So again, it'll be a bit of a learning curve, but we're hopeful that it will expedite things and keep all of the information in one place, especially on our end, all the documentation and reporting. So just as a quick overview, I want to remind everyone that the purpose of this program is to support the capital needs of facilities and organizations that preserve and interpret Washington's history and heritage, and to provide public access to history. So that is really what we're going to be focusing on in your monitoring and future correspondence with you, that you are continuing to provide public access to history, and that your grant project needs to support that effort as well. Some important dates to keep in mind. This will be a little different from past grantees if you're familiar with the program or have participated before. So July 1st is the first day of the biennium, and that is when we can start signing contracts. That's coming right up. We obviously need to draft the contracts first, which will take a bit of time. But we want to be sure to prioritize the contracts of the organizations that really need to get started on reimbursable expenses right away. So in the questionnaire that I sent out to everybody, there is which is in the Heritage portal, there is a question that basically says, is it extremely urgent or immediately urgent? Is it somewhat urgent or not immediately urgent to get your contract executed? So I would say the extremely urgent is basically within the next week or two, you were hoping to have a contract. So let us know if you fall under that category, because we will prioritize getting yours written and reviewed. We are doing reporting a little bit different this year. We do want to, instead of quarterly reports with a lot of detailed information, we want to switch to monthly reports that are a little bit kind of quicker check-ins. So again, this is going to be through the Heritage portal. And what we basically want to see is just what progress has been made. And if there has been no progress, let us know that too. That's okay. We certainly know that things take time, and maybe each month you won't be making progress on each part of your scope, but just give us an update so that we're in regular communication and we're getting regular updates about where you're at, and that we can help you if need be. We are also going to be doing the reimbursement reporting through the Heritage portal. So the payments for reimbursement can occur on the 10th and 26th of the month. That's when our financial office or our fiscal office processes payments. So the day after, on the 11th and 26th, you will see a potential reimbursement report in the portal that you can potentially fill out. You don't have to, obviously, every month or twice a month, certainly that would be a lot of reimbursement, but we'll just have it available for you if that is the month that you do want to go ahead and submit for reimbursement. So we'll talk about that a little bit more as we get that report finalized. We'll have some video instructions for you in the future of kind of how to fill all that out and how that all works, but we won't go into quite that much detail today. And then June 30th of 2023 is the last day of the biennium. So that is when your contracts expire, and that date is the same on every contract. And so that is when you need to have the physical work of your project completed. There is a little bit of room in the schedule to submit paperwork past that date until July of 2023, but the work of the project needs to be done by June 30th. And please remember that as we're working through this contract phase, you may not begin work on any expenses that you want reimbursed until you have that contract executed with us and it's signed by all parties. Some big ideas to remember, just to refresh your memory, since it's been a while since you submitted your applications. Funding is for capital costs only, which must be directly related to the construction elements of your project. That's not only the grant dollars, but also the match as well. It is reimbursement only, which means that you'd have to complete the work first and then submit the documentation of it in order to receive your grant dollars. Again, no funds expended prior to being under contract. There's a 2-to-1 funding match required, which means 2 parts your funding, 1 part state funding. You must be able to document 100% of your match before your contract is signed. You may not be able to use match twice for different projects. So if you have had a grant from Commerce or something like that, and you used match for that grant, you can't also use it for this grant. And then no other state funds may be used as match. So if you did have that grant from Commerce, you can't use the Commerce dollars as your match for our program. All right, so moving into the sort of tribal and DAP consultation section of today. we are required to follow Executive Order 2102, which recently replaced Executive Order 0505, if any of you are familiar with that. The good news is that this basically, our process for Heritage Capital projects doesn't actually need to change all that much. We chatted with Nick Van over at the state, and he basically said, which made me feel good, that the revised language in 2102 basically clarified that all state agencies need to consult with DAP, and he basically said that we'd been doing everything that is in 2102 already, and it was intended to sort of help other state agencies get up to that level too. So although the executive order itself has changed, our process does not need to change or update. The executive orders become law when the state budget is adopted and signed by the governor, and the responsibilities of consultation are passed to you as the applicant. So you do need to consult with tribes and with DAP on your project. And if any of you do need federal review, you don't have to do a duplicative state review because it basically reviews all of the same elements as far as historic preservation is concerned. And this is typically section 106, that's the federal review. That would occur if you are using federal dollars on your project, or if you need some sort of federal permit for your project, something like that. If you do need that, DAP will let you know. So you just don't have to do it twice. You don't have to do the federal version and the state version, just the federal version if that applies to you. All right, so you must consult with any affected tribe and the Washington State Department of Archaeology and Historic Preservation. So that's this is DAHP is the DAP I've been referring to. That's the Department of Archaeology and Historic Preservation. This consultation must be completed before we can contract with you. And I'm happy to say that a lot of you have already completed that, or at least have initiated that. So that needs to continue for anyone who hasn't completed that. You'll need to do that before we can contract. If your scope changes after your contract is signed, you get into it, you realize you need to change it or add things, go ahead and consult with us, but you also need to update DAP and tribes if there are major changes to your scope. You need to keep everybody updated as project partners, essentially. And then I just wanted to call out these terms here, TIPO and SHPO here at the bottom. TIPO stands for Tribal Historic Preservation Officer, and SHPO stands for State Historic Preservation Officer or Office. DAP is our SHPO. There's a lot of lingo here that you kind of have to navigate. And then each tribe has their own historic preservation. Each federally recognized tribe has their own historic preservation officer as well, and that's referred to as a TIPO. So as far as tribal consultation, each tribe is sovereign and has their own process for this. So we can't really give you very specific instructions per the tribes that are affected by your project or in your local area. So you will have to kind of navigate that. Each organization will have to navigate that. And keep in mind that tribes get dozens or hundreds of review requests, and many of the TIPOs are understaffed. So they get requests for the section 106 that I mentioned before, all of the 2102 projects. Basically, any project in Washington, it's the law, any large construction project has to be reviewed by the tribes, and so that's a lot for them to do. And so keep that in mind as you're working with them, and the tribes will respond to the ones that are significant for them. So it's important to build meaningful relationships with local tribes outside of asking them for things, for asking them for review. generally, that's good practice for heritage organizations around the state. So that is something that that you should be doing in addition to the sort of more formal consultation and consultation with your tribes. The Historical Society does have a tribal liaison, Michael Finley. He is great, and he's happy to offer advice, but he's not able to do consultation for you. Chatting with him does not count as consultation. He is a tribal person, but he does not represent all tribes, obviously, in Washington. So he's happy to give you advice if you're at a spot where you don't know what to do next, but he's not going to be contacting tribes on your behalf. Basically, Michael recommended that in order to initiate tribal consultation, that you send a letter to the tribal chairperson, and if there is no response in a few weeks, then send a second letter to the TIPO of the tribe, referencing that first letter. And if there's still no response, that's generally sort of an indication that the tribe doesn't have any particular concerns with your project. But like I said, it is still really good to build those meaningful relationships, and so that you can have that more open dialogue. So we certainly understand that tribes don't always respond, and that can be frustrating for people. But like I said, those meaningful relationships are important to build. So if you're having trouble with this piece of your project, hopefully a lot of you are already well into this or have already communicated with local tribes. Let us know. We can help, and we can pull Michael in and offer you sort of advice on next steps for that. As far as communicating and consulting with DAP, there are kind of two ways to talk to DAP. One is informal and one is formal. So basically informal means you just call them up, you chat with them about your project, get a sense of what they think about your project, if they have any sort of initial thoughts or suggestions for your project. And that's a good thing to do at the beginning, and to just sort of start that conversation, start a relationship with the staff there, and just keep that open communication. Formal consultation is when you specifically enter into the regulatory phase of things. And so once it becomes formal, things have to be submitted in writing. They are responding in their official regulatory capacity. So it does need to get to the formal consultation at some point. But if you communicate and are transparent in the informal process, once you get to the formal piece, hopefully you'll know their response to your project, and they'll have given you enough guidance and instruction that the formal piece will be very smooth, and you'll know what to expect. So ways to initiate that are submitting EZ1 or EZ3 forms to them, submitting an HPI form through the Wizard database, or sending a letter with the bulleted information here. So again, hopefully most of you have already started this work, but just as a good overview for everybody. And I will scoot ahead to this slide. These are the contacts for Heritage Capital Projects. Nick Van was the previous contact, but he is now the deputy SHPO, so his responsibilities have changed, and now Holly Borth will be our main contact for built environment issues, and Rob Whitlam is the contact for the archaeology issues. So if you have questions about how to initiate consultation, questions about your project, contact these folks as soon as you can. And again, this needs to be completed before we can contract with you. Quick backtrack to this slide, some exemptions, projects which have no ground disturbing activities, buildings less than 50 years old. That's the sort of national standard, and then projects reviewable through a federal action. So that's what I was saying before. If you have to get a federal review for other reasons in your project, you don't have to duplicate that effort. Okay, quickly, we're going to talk a little bit about preservation standards. Like I said, a lot of you probably will, a lot of you have, new construction, so this doesn't necessarily apply, but it is good to keep in mind as heritage organizations in Washington State. So the Secretary of the Interior with the National Park Service, I've got the screenshot of their website here. They have standards for preservation, rehabilitation, restoration, and reconstruction. And you can see here that in this continuum that it's sort of an issue of more historic material retained to less material retained. And it's not an exact tiered system. There's a lot of overlap within these standards. And so it's less of a science, more of an art form as far as how to treat a historic property, because it really depends on the property itself. So as a quick overview of each of these four types, preservation is focusing on maintaining and repairing existing materials, and interestingly, retention of changes over time. So that means that you preserve it in place as it is, and replace with historic material or with matching materials. Rehabilitation is probably where most of your projects will fall if it involves historic properties. This means that there needs to be alterations and upgrades to meet the building's changing use, but you still want to keep those really core elements that convey the historic significance and that historic character that makes historic places so special. So you can see in here that there's been, in this photo, there's been lots of modern adaptations in this building, but it still has a lot of really great, beautiful character. This is the McKinstry offices in Spokane, in an old trolley barn. Restoration is picking a particular point in time for a property to be reverted back to. So you remove any later changes and restore missing elements if they're missing. Have this great example from North Bend. This bakery got alpinized, as we say, in the 70s or 80s, and it recently, well, in the last 5 years or so, got taken back to when more closely to when it was originally built. Great little building. And lastly, reconstruction is using the information that you have to rebuild something that is lost. So here's Fort Vancouver, the balustrade there, and this has been reconstructed and is a great space that represents history, but is able to be used. And well, it's actually coming up now. It's almost going to be 50 years old itself, so that it'll be the reconstruction will be historic. So it's a little bit of preservation inception there. So as I was saying, no one size fits all as far as the approach to these four principles. It depends on the relative importance of the building and to history and other buildings that survive, what the physical condition is, how much materials left, what you're proposing to do with it, and then any mandated code requirements. All of these things have to be considered when you're deciding the approach that you want to take. But the basic principles are repair first, where possible, keep that historic material, replace in kind. So if you do have to replace a window or other element, try to use the same types of materials. And if you do need to make significant changes like an addition or some large change, it should be compatible and reversible are two things. And compatible does not necessarily mean mimicking the historic character. Often ideas in historic preservation are ever evolving, but it's widely seen as best practices today to, if you do need to add something like an addition, that it should look different than the original to be able to be differentiated. That, the original was built at, 1930s, and this addition was added in the 2020s, so that sort of the future folks will be able to readily tell that in the record. So, all right, that was a lot. I've scheduled a little quick break for folks before we move into the contract overview. Did we get any questions in the chat? I'm not seeing any. Is there anyone that has any questions so far about sort of channel program principles or tribal consultation or preservation principles or coordinating with DAP? Levon is asking if the slides will be sent via email. Yes, we can definitely send those to you, and we'll also be posting them on that link in the website that that I had on one of those slides. And can we see the DAP contact info again? Yes. For anyone who wants to go ahead and go on a break, well, let's answer a few of these questions. Melanie, we'll send you the contact via email when we send the slides. If we completed the tribal consultation for the application, is there additional work needed? No, if you've completed tribal consultation, that's the only work you need for that, but you do need consultation with DAP as well. That's an official process. It's both and tribes and DAP. And the exemptions were for consulting with DAP, yes, Dee, but DAP will tell you. You should coordinate with DAP and make sure that you're communicating with them and getting that info directly from them. They are regulatory, unlike us, so it is them who will give you instructions about if you are exempt or not. Holly, great question. What constitutes completion of tribal consultation? Much was done during the application process. We did not hear back from each tribe consulted. So this is a problem I think that comes up for a lot of grantees. I think we can just work with folks individually to sort of look at the consultation that you've done and chat with Michael Finley and sort of determine if that's enough, if that's sort of sufficient. And then otherwise, if Michael has any sort of further suggestions, obviously you can go ahead and follow those. But if sort of a good faith effort was made and sufficient time was given for the tribe to respond and maybe a couple of follow-ups were made and you still didn't get the response that you were hoping, we can go ahead and proceed. But we will want to go ahead and use Michael's knowledge of tribal processes before we sign that off, and we'll consult with him. Okay.
Hey, I think Jeff from Museum of Flight had a question. He raised his hand.
Oh, sorry, I missed that.
No worries, guys. Thanks, David. Can I assume that the monthly reporting does not have to start until the contract is in place?
Yes, that is a good assumption. Unless you disagree, David. We did not discuss that beforehand, but that makes sense to me.
Yeah, I agree.
Thanks.
Yeah, great question. And thanks for your patience, Jeff.
If it gets down to 6 months from now and you don't have a signed contract, then we might be asking what's going on, but
We'll be keeping track of that in a different in a different way, I guess, or with a different perspective.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, if there's a big delay on your contract, we may want to go ahead and just get a couple of state reported, reports submitted from you, but we'll deal with that on a case-by-case basis. And Norma Green had a question: since our project moved from a new building to an older existing building on the same property owned by the city, do I have to do DAP and tribal again, or just notify them? Norma or Gina, I would say definitely need to notify. This is sort of a good example of when the scope changes significantly. So instead of building a new building, you are going to be doing work on an existing building. So yes, I would definitely kind of go back to the contacts that you made in your application phase and let them know that this change has occurred and ask them if they have any concerns about it. I would think that there would not be any concerns, but of course you need to chat with the tribes and with TAP. And Kathleen, do we need state approval for contracts that we are using our funds for?
I think there's a couple questions there inadvertently, but as far as your contractors and the contracts you're writing to get your projects complete, we do not look at those. If there's a question to scope or there's some clarification needed, we may ask for the contract eventually, but we're not going to review it and approve it before you contract with your own contractors. You do want to make sure, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, that you're in compliance with Labor and Industries and the other enforcement authorities throughout the state. But the other question that wasn't asked here that should be brought up also is we do need to approve any changes to leases, long-term leases or tenant leases that have a potential to change the purpose of the property. For example, if you are rehabilitating a historic building and you're going to have a tenant in that space, and whatever it is, maybe it's a dojo, they need to be held to the same interpretation standards and interpretation expectations that the purpose of the grant was intended for. So we do need to look at those kind of contracts.
Really good point. Another question from Melanie: work that we intend to count towards our match, can we start that before our contract is in place? Yes, many projects will have been already in process right now, and will be working on elements of the project as matched, and that's fine. It's just those elements that you want to be reimbursed for by grant dollars that you have to wait until the contract is in place. So be sure to, even if it's matched moving forward, and David will talk more about this, you do need to be documenting all of the expenses for that match at a high level, sort of moving forward now that you have been awarded your grant. For past, because we allow match of up to 6 years in the past, we certainly understand that some documentation may not be as thorough as you would like, because you maybe didn't even realize you were going to be applying for this grant at the time. But moving forward, both match and any reimbursable expenses need to be thoroughly documented, and David will talk more about that later. So. Okay, let's, Damien, do prevailing wages have to be in place for all contracted work that we intend to file for reimbursement? Yes, and we will talk about that in the next section. So let's call it a break right now. You're welcome to throw some more questions in the chat that we can address at the next break, but we'll reconvene at 10:45